We're going to be talking about what we call the age of agents.
Oh, the age of agents. That's what we coined. I love it.
Agents, everybody. Agents is like lost all meaning at this point in time. Everything's an agent. These tools enable you to go faster with less capital. You can build a company that gives you more control. Everything just moves really fast right now. You can have hyper growth, like high performing companies that are bootstrapped. We raised $1 million and change post YC, and then we got profitable after that and have never raised any primary capital since then. I'd be lying if I was like, man, it would be nice to have just like a little more time to think. I see some of these reasoning models, they get to think for like an hour now, and I'm like, man, that sounds pretty great. Can I think for an hour?
Hey everybody, it's Sam Jacobs, CEO of Pavilion. Welcome to another great episode of Top Line. I'm joined by my co-host, AJ Bruno, who's the CEO of QuotaPath. Asad Zaman is not available today, but we do have a very special guest on the show, Wade Foster, who is the CEO and co-founder of Zapier. Now, before we get into everything that Zapier does, I want to set the stage for this episode. We're going to be talking about what we call the age of agents. Now, depending on who you ask, agents are either about to remake how work gets done, or they're just the latest layer of hype on top of automation and AI. The reality, as usual, is probably more nuanced. The real question for operators and CEOs isn't whether agents matter, but where they actually work, where they don't, and what changes inside companies as they become more real. And to do this, Wade, I'll give his bio and then he'll introduce himself. But Zapier, if you don't know Zapier, you're living under a rock. They're the most connected AI orchestration platform. Zapier connects teams, tools, AI, and agents across more than 8,000 apps to automate critical workflows with flexibility, scale, and control. Prior to Zapier, Wade worked in marketing at Veterans United and IdeaWorks. He has degrees in industrial engineering and business administration from the University of Missouri, Columbia, Mizzou. Wade, welcome to Top Line.
Welcome, Wade.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
Wait, don't you love how Sam said we call agents as if Top Line coined the term agents? We call these agents.
It was the age of agents, AJ. It was the age of agents.
The age of agents. That's what we coined. I love it.
Agents, everybody. Agents is like lost all meaning at this point in time. Everything's an agent.
I think before we dive into the heart of the conversation, I do think there are probably a few people that haven't heard of Zapier. Some people think it's pronounced Zapier. I'm pretty sure that it's not. But tell us a little bit about the origin of the company, how it emerged, and how it's gotten to where it is today. Because I don't think you started with the description that I read in your bio, which is the most connected AI orchestration platform. But maybe that was the vision all along. So walk us through the origin story of Zapier, and then we'll dive into what's going on in the world today.
Yeah, you can see bits of it. That most connected bit, like that was there at the beginning, where in 2011, basically what we observed was that if you were to go to the help site of any popular SaaS product of the time, there would be this type of question that was commonly asked, which is, when are you all going to integrate with X? And you would read the replies, and the replies would be a bunch of customers saying, +1, me too, yeah, I want this as well. And eventually a product manager would chime in and say, hey, thanks for the feedback, everybody. We're going to go ahead and take a look at this, and we'll get back to you, which is basically code for, yeah, probably not going to happen. And so we thought, hey, we can make a really simple way for people who don't know what APIs are, who don't know how to write code, to build integrations behind these tools. And you'd have a trigger for like a new event happening. You'd have an action that would happen automatically. And that's kind of where it started, was these just like very simple integrations. 5 years later, we added multiple actions along and allowed you to build end-to-end workflows. In a lot of the ways, you can think of those as a precursor to modern day agents. Now, these were deterministic workflows that performed a discrete set of tasks in a very predictable way. But it turns out it's pretty darn close to the modern definition of what an agent is. So Zaps in some way are kind of like mini deterministic agents.
It turns out Wade actually coined the term agents from this.
Well, we tried to call them Zaps, but I think the world wanted
I'll call them Zaps. How did things change in 2022 when ChatGPT came out and Gen AI became, part of household conversation? And was that, did you have to readjust your roadmap, or were you saying, you know what, this is great. This is just in line with everything we've been doing. To your point, if they want to call Zaps agents, Call him whatever you want as long as
Yeah.
they're using Zapier.
Well, a lot changed, but it took us a minute to figure out what exactly are we dealing with here. I think the ChatGPT moment itself wasn't actually like a catalyst for us. We had been dabbling with AI pre-ChatGPT, and I say we, my co-founders and I, mostly them, kind of as ICs, and like the rest of the company. I think we were like, hey, that's cool, have fun, co-founders, doing weird experimental stuff is kind of par for the course, right? The rest of us, we've got like revenue goals to hit and product to ship, and like we're hard charging towards that. um, ChatGPT comes out and it was like, hey, this is pretty cool. But it wasn't too different than some of the things that my co-founders had built. And so we were very just suggestive about it internally. We're, in Slack, we'd post in general like, hey, check ChatGPT out. We think this is cool. Maybe you think this is cool too. It might be useful to think about where you could put this on your roadmap. Yay, have fun with this. Like that was kind of the vibes. What really was the catalyzing moment for us was GPT-4. So GPT-4 launched roughly 6 months later. And the speed at which we went from 3.5 to 4, roughly 6 months, was very impressive. And the difference in model quality was pretty large. And so GPT-4 is a fantastic model, way better than 3.5. And we looked at that and said, whoa, if this pace continues, we need to this changes everything. And so that was where we got much more intense about shifting the company to being to taking advantage of AI capabilities. Now, in terms of what specifically has changed, I think there's two pretty important callouts. One is AI opens up entirely new use cases, specifically around working with unstructured data. So in the past, if you wanted to build an automation, you had to have it very well structured. Think like I've got a lead form that has a name, an email address, a company, a domain, and great, I'm going to collect it from the lead form, and then I'm going to put it into the CRM as name, email, company address, domain, right? Just very structured every step of the way. But if you had, a big old email or a big old Gong transcript or just like messy, like a PDF, if you had stuff like that and your data was kind of, well, it's in there somewhere, the answers are in there-ish, you basically couldn't do automation around that, at least not in any like highly effective way. And so now, it turns out with LLMs, it's much easier to take advantage of unstructured data. You can say, hey, there is contact details in this invoice. There is product purchases inside this invoice. Extract them and now log them into QuickBooks and make a good invoice out of these things. So you can work with unstructured data as part of like your automations. So that's a big one. The second one is creating workflows is now a lot easier. Used to be you'd have to go through a bunch of configuration steps and you have to explain things very precisely in the setup flow. Well, now you get natural language. The idea of vibe building is like a really big concept. And it's because it's a lot easier for humans to speak in the way that we've been trained to speak since we were toddlers. And then the machine can now interpret that, put that back in front of you as a plan and say, hey, what I think I heard you say is you wanted me to go build this, this, and this. I've added a bunch of extra details to it. Do you think that's correct? And you can say yes or no. And it's a lot easier for humans to go build stuff in that form factor versus sitting down and saying, I have to come up exactly, precisely with what I want to go create on day one. And so I think those are the two big shifts you see when you go interact with Zapier now is you get that vibe building experience and you get the ability to work with unstructured data.
There's a whole bunch of questions here, but one of the questions you're just talking about were on the workflow. When ChatGPT came out and it became clear that like the start of it was going to be a chat interface, and then that has evolved, and you all definitely picked that and said like, okay, that's what people are familiar with. Where some other competitors have done more of a workflow visualization of it, and I know that's something that you all have changed. Like how this area of the world is evolving so quickly and what customers expect and how they want those workflows to work. How are you all staying like just on top of that? And are there changes or has there been a time where you're like, oh, okay, this isn't working for what our customers want. We actually just have to throw it out and refactor this whole idea and how we're thinking about this.
Yeah, I think product development is definitely changing right now. I think you can't be in love with your particular solution to a problem, in part because, well, you one might be wrong. Like this was always true. You might be wrong. But I think the real key difference now is you can build prototypes so much faster than you could in the past. And so there's just so much more throwaway code where you're like, hey, let's try this. Like, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And the cost of like throwing away code, like it just doesn't feel like that big of a deal. Like if you talk to your engineers in your company, like they probably have something like Cursor or Claude Code running constantly,
All of
and a
them,
good
all of the things.
and a good chunk of that code that's being generated doesn't go to production. It's just, yeah, let's just build a thing and, use it one time or maybe never use it. But it's like the cost of that is effectively free now. And so you just have a lot more of that going on. The second thing that shifted in terms of, thinking through the roadmap is you just have like a lot more ideas in the world. And so you have to be kind of nimble and agile, and respond to what is working for customers,
Yeah.
and be ready to react to that. And I think the third thing is the model capabilities are emergent. You've got new models coming out, I don't know, every 3 to 6 months. And once the model hits, you don't always know exactly what it's capable of on day one, but over the course of weeks and months, you start to figure out like, this experience, or like this model now allows me to build with these new types of experiences. And so as a result, this idea of like, oh, here is my 3 year vision or my like 1 year roadmap. Um, I find the like percent of correctness of those documents to be just a lot lower these days.
Yeah. I think that there's a lot of pieces, things are just going out of date so much faster, and we're okay like moving on to the next thing and trying new things. You talked about the experimentation. No, for Zapier, navigating this idea of like this workflow automation into where there was few competitors into something much, much larger, and agent and tooling where there's so much noise and so much building. You all were at the very tip of the spear, and I think in a lot of ways still are, but at the same time, you now have this huge landscape of competitors. How have you navigated that transition? And I think that follow on to that, something you mentioned and talked about in your podcast with Amanda, in one mind was just this idea of moving from PLG to enterprise. And I know Zapier has become more of an enterprise solution. I think a couple of years ago you released your enterprise version. And so like how have those two things collided? And isn't it fun to be a CEO right now?
Yeah, the way I talk about it to the team is, our first decade, we were kind of working in a space that was pretty unsexy, kind of overlooked and forgotten. No one was doing integration and workflow. It was just not all that interesting. We thought it was interesting. We thought automation, efficiency, productivity was like great. It felt obvious to us that more companies should care about it. But in practice, it didn't actually play out that way, which always kind of surprised me. You think of like, the 2010s was the era of, blitz scaling. It's like, hey, you should scale up really fast, throw a bunch of bodies at this problem, and you'll figure out how to optimize it later. And so in practice, you just didn't find organizations, particularly in tech, cared as much about efficiency and automation as maybe what we felt they should. But on the good news, no one was like competing in our space. So we kind of had this, blue ocean to go after. Post ChatGPT, those traits have inverted, where we certainly are not in a like one of a kind in the market anymore. Like there are a lot of people attacking this space from all sorts of different angles,
Including OpenAI themselves, it seems.
I mean, everybody kind of has like a version of what they're thinking about.
Yeah.
But the flip side is the market potential has also increased 100-fold, 1,000-fold, maybe more so, because everybody sees the possibility of what you can do with automation, with AI, with when you focus on efficiency and things like that. Which, in the grand scheme of things, I'd rather be in the market that's like enormous and have some competition to keep you on your toes than be in the sleepy other area. So I find that like pretty exciting. As far as the PLG enterprise thing, I actually think again we benefited quite a bit from the AI era because it's given a reason for enterprises who may have written us off to come back and look at us again and say, hey, maybe Zapier actually has figured some stuff out here, which I think is a good thing because we are quite a bit different from a product perspective than we were, even just a couple of years ago. And so there's a lot of companies that if the AI era had not come around, they might have just been like, I looked at it like it wasn't for me then. And I think if you're one of those people, you should check us out again because it is a very different product experience now.
I also think that, for me, to the point of the intro, it makes perfect sense strategically that Zapier would be building autonomous agents at this point, because again, to your point, like these structured deterministic workflows are the predecessor to agents. And now you have 10 years of a trusted brand to credentialize your right to win that market, which I think is a big thing in a world with thousands and thousands of competitors. What is your right? Why do you deserve to be there? Have you felt that uplift? Have you become one of these stories where all of a sudden growth dramatically accelerated as a consequence of, the wind, the AI wind in your sales?
Yeah, I think especially when you look at the enterprise side of the business, it's exactly what you said, Sam, where there's, 10 plus years of trust, reliability. These integrations are rock solid now. We're operating at a scale that makes it work a lot better for these organizations. I think also, we can talk about the challenges of navigating this era in a way that's more relatable. When AI hit, like we were a 700-person company. We had to like reinvent our own operations. We had to figure out these things from first principles in a way that maybe a brand new startup is like, we don't have the same problems that you have at this stage, but we have them. And so we can come in and say, hey, here's how we thought about solving, employee onboarding, offboarding, or here's how we thought about reinventing our RevOps stack, or here's how we thought about, changing how we work with, sales data and things like that. And so a lot of our customers look to us, our own operations, not just the product, but it's the product plus how we, our expertise in these areas. And that helps quite a bit.
So diving into the specific topic of, agents and I'm reminded of Jason Lemkin, who says, they used to have 20 or 30 people working at SaaStr. Now they have 3 people, but 8 full-time agents. I think, and he's an investor in half of them. So we don't know what the reality is of how agents are actually working in practice and in production, where they're not working, what it truly means, if they're a common definition. So when you see use cases that are really, really successful, and then use cases where there's still a lot of hype, where do you think they succeed and where do they still break down?
What is working today is what I would call like agentic workflows. So an agentic workflow is pretty similar to like a deterministic workflow, where you still have like deterministic nodes, kind of like how Zapier works historically. But then in the middle of it, you're inserting either an LLM step or, an agentic step that handles some like unstructured data, maybe makes a decision for you, maybe helps like summarize some information, categorize some details, things like that. And then it extends back into a deterministic workflow. And the reason this tends to work well is that LLMs do really well with lots of context. And so with deterministic workflows, you can feed it precise context. And then you can target what you want the agent or the LLM to do to a very specific task. And when you're able to do that, you get higher reliability for the entire flow. What isn't working as well is, hey, agent, go reinvent how I do onboarding. Like these tasks are too big, too abstract, and the more you chain along various tasks that you want out of the agent, the more it drifts from what a human might consider the correct application of this. Now, agents are getting better, and they're getting better fast, but in the enterprise setting, at least, what you really need is you do need to break these things down into their smallest actionable like components, and then tie those into a mix of like deterministic workflow and agentic workflows, and that's really what gives you the advantages today.
Are there specific like horizontal functional areas where you've seen great success, or is it really it can be an agent can be successful in HR, in finance, in sales, as long as you've done the work of breaking it up into its component
Yeah,
parts?
we've seen success in any function. I don't think there is, oh, this function, it doesn't apply over here, or only this function can take advantage of it. Obviously, there's areas like coding agents that are getting a lot of discussion today because they are quite good there. Customer support is another area that gets a lot of disproportionate talk because the success is coming faster. But I don't think that like our we have evidence in basically every function in vertical where you can apply AI and be successful.
Wait, it's clear you're like working to evangelize this as much as you can. And I've heard a lot about Zapier and making the team AI literate across the organization. I just saw the interview that your assistant had with Claire Vo and the Lenny's podcast recently. Have you seen the Wade GPT, by the way? Do you have access to the Wade GPT to be able to see how your team
I
talks
do,
to
yeah,
you?
yeah.
Um, I kind of curious if you incentivize or how do you ensure your team stays on top of AI trends? Are there different ways and tactics that you get your employees to help evangelize in the same manner?
Yeah, early on, it was a little more like pushing a boulder up a hill, where it was like, hey, we got to get people to pay attention to this new way of working, this new technology, and also some of those early models had just more rough spots, right? Pre-reasoning, you had more hallucinations, it was easier for like a smart person to look at it and go, this isn't good enough, and it's hard. And as much as you could say like, yeah, but just wait till it gets better, wait till it gets better, like you could sort of see how they might get like a smart person might be disillusioned with like the dialogue around AI. But we kept doing regular hackathons. We kept doing regular show and tell internally. We implemented a few constraints. We said, hey, we're not going to greenlight new hires or new software spend unless either me or my CFO have a chance to like review why you think you should go get them. We still will have new hires and new software spend. It's just we're putting a little bit of friction in there to make sure there's a forcing function to go and try and use Zapier, go and try and use AI first and foremost. And that you kind of had that recipe um, marinate for about a year. And out the other side, we get a team that is much more eager to push on AI now. And so now, instead of us pushing that boulder up a hill, it's more trying to chase the good ideas inside the company and trying to keep up with the good ideas and say, hey, how do we actually do more of that? And so I think that's like the big shift that has happened for us. And it's less of a, oh, I have to go convince you to like take AI seriously now. Everyone sees it because once you use it and you get some success out of it, you don't really want to go back. It's not like you have to convince somebody, oh, this thing that like saved me a bunch of time and hassle, like I really don't want to use that thing. Like give me the old boring hard way.
Well, and I find that's true for anyone. Of course, it does, but it's just ensuring that there's uniformity between the teams and collaboration. Because if sometimes I find if someone finds something that they feel like they want to keep a secret and it's like making them 10 times more productive and you're like, wow, you're killing it, it's harder to get them to open up. So that's why I asked about the incentivizing question of just like, how do we get our teams to continue to not just be curious about it, but then like when they find something that's working, communicate to the org or the broad org about like what they're doing and why they're doing it. It definitely makes sense to bubble up to you of like, just okay, I need to check this out. I want to be hands on keyboard with this, but then making sure cross collaboration in the teams is still happening too.
We just brag about those people a
Yeah.
lot. Like I think that type of person inside of Zapier gets a lot of props. Like you get a lot of just like people are just very curious and interested to see that. We have a value that's been in place since the beginning called "Don't be a robot, build a robot." And so people just love seeing what cool things like their peers are building.
What do you think if you look out into next year and you're thinking about planning? There's a lot of talk about an AI bubble. There's a lot of talk about some of the commitments that OpenAI as an organization has and whether that will cause some financial distress that will flow through to the entire ecosystem. What are you most worried about when it comes to 2026 planning, and what are you most excited about?
I think that even if the model capabilities stall, that there is an enormous amount of product experiences and customer learning left to happen. And so that to me is what is really exciting right now, is that I walk into like many of our customers who are just at the beginning of these things, and I just see opportunity left and right for them with like no like magic tricks, no science fiction required. It's just, hey, this stuff is here today, and you can like reinvent the way you work with everything that we've got. So that to me is like what is pretty exciting. What worries me, like, I think it's just everything just moves really fast right now, and I think that's exciting. But I'd be lying if I was like, man, it would be nice to have just like a little more time to think. You know, I see
It's
some of these reasoning models; they get to think for like an hour now, and
no,
I'm like,
why
man,
can't
that
we get
sounds
20
pretty
to 30
great.
minutes and come
Can
back
I
to our
think for an
desk and
hour?
answer? Yeah, why can't we tell our management team, like, hold on, I got to go to my thinking room and I'll get back to you in 20, 30 minutes when I've reasoned through this.
I know.
Well, the reality is, like, we've all three of us are going through financial planning and have done. And so, like, we bring this up to the board. It also makes it more challenging because you have to leave room for what that white space of we don't know. And we have to be okay with it, where the board expectations have always been like, well, this is the predictable financial model. This is what we're going to do quarter to quarter. And so we've just had to leave much more of a margin of error for we're going to take our financial model and completely make it predictable off of the product that we have today and what we know today. And then all of the upside is just going to be off of what we're going to be launching, what we're building, what we're thinking about that we just don't know. And I'm okay communicating this and like, this is the core model. Don't worry about all of this other stuff. I was kind of curious for you guys, for both of you, if that's something like you've thought about or have talked through with your boards and what their expectations are, because mine has been good, but it's also still they fall back into like old patterns of like, well, this is what we did 2 years ago or 3 years ago.
Yeah. I'm probably going to give you an unsatisfactory answer. The board at Zapier is three founders plus an independent that we named, a decade in.
You guys are both
So
bastards. You both are
yeah,
bastards.
like we call our own shots. Yeah, like, and I
I
think
think I knew
it's
that. I think I remember reading an article about this.
well, I don't have a lot of great advice for people who are in like the situation you describe, where it's like, hey, I've got a board that's like, you know, full of like legacy thinking. And like, how do I sort of shake that? Like, I think that's pretty tough. But I think for those of you who are, maybe in a new startup, like, I think the reality is like, raise less money. These tools enable you to go faster with less capital. And, you can build a company that gives you more control. And you may not be in a situation today where that matters, but if you're going to build your company for the long haul, you're inevitably going to have like platform shifts and technology shifts. And in those moments, you're going to want to have a structure set up that allows you to be bold and maybe, take one step, backwards in order to take two steps forward. And if you don't have that flexibility, you're going to be caught on a local maxima. And that means you might miss out on like a really important platform shift.
For the record, I have a great board and I have that flexibility. And it's not just because I'm wearing an Insight Partners hat right now.
Terry,
I
he
promise
doesn't say
you.
that when we're not
I,
recording,
I, I
everybody.
figured it was a different AJ that had this
Yeah.
problem.
Wait, I'm sorry.
Theoretically,
I didn't know
Yeah.
this. I thought, weren't you guys a YC company when you started? But but you didn't have you been profitable ever since, or you just been very tight on fundraising and didn't need to give up board seats? What's the capital history of
Yeah,
the
we
business?
raised $1 million and change post YC, and then we got profitable after that, and have never raised any primary capital since then.
That is so freaking cool. Was that a point of view that you held, that you and your three co-founders had, which is, this is how we run the business. We don't want to give it away to Sequoia or Excel or whomever?
Yeah, we sort of treated that money like it was the last we were ever going to have. It was like, hey, we want to go figure out how to get the company profitable and grow based off of this. We had worked with at this company, Veterans United, ahead of time, which was owned 50-50 by two brothers. They never raised a dime. And I was employee 500 there. And when I left 10 months later, starting Zapier, there was 1,000 employees. And so we saw that you can have hyper growth, like high performing companies that are bootstrapped. Um, and so I think that just sort of made us a little more skeptical of, there's only one way to build a great company, and it's, to raise a series A, B, C, D, da, 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 da. We just felt like there was other ways to go about it. And I think as a result, we just made different choices than most.
And maybe comfortable understanding, or I mean, to your point, there's one point of view, which is I guess if you're YC 2012, it's a 13-year-old company now, which is incredible. And hey, if it takes 15 or 20 years to get to $1 billion in revenue, that's fine. We're not going anywhere. But I'm sure you had people calling you all the time, including VCs, saying you could grow faster if you took our money. And your perspective was probably one of two, if not both. One is no, money is not the constraint. Customer growth is the constraint. And we don't need your money to grow. But two, if it takes longer, then it takes longer. I'd rather own 25% of $1 billion company than 3% of $1 billion company, even if the $1 billion comes, 5 years sooner or something like that.
Yeah, the first was definitely the mindset where it was like money wasn't the constraining factor. And if it's not the constraining factor, why sell a portion of your company? Like equity is one of the rarest things inside of an organization. It's the most difficult to get back. It's like the closest to a one-way door that exists inside your company. There's very few other things that like are as challenging to take backsies on. And so you just should be a lot more, I guess, thoughtful about going down that road.
Yeah, I love that. Last question for me, but if you're thinking again, advice for CEOs, I guess, what have you learned over the last 13 years? What piece of advice would you give to a CEO to not do despite the hype? Because a lot of CEOs, to the point, AJ's in a board meeting. AJ is not like you in the sense that he's got a lot of different investors with a lot of different price points that they not a lot, but different, right? A lot of different voices at the table. AJ, you can correct me if I'm wrong. We're not saying any of them are bad or good. We're just saying there's a lot of different pieces.
It's better if you say them and you say these words and I don't say these words.
Right. And there's no pejorative here.
Theoretically.
Nobody did anything wrong. But he's getting a lot of text messages from investors at different investment points along the journey. And there's a lot of different conflicting pieces of feedback. What's the number one thing you should not do if you're a software CEO in 2025, looking ahead to 2026, trying to be AI first, whether or not that's true or not?
The number one thing you should not do. I think when you're the founder of a company, you generally are thinking much more long-term than anyone else at the table. More so than your employees, more so than your investors, more so than your board members, probably even more so than your customers, even to some degree. And that doesn't mean that you're like going to be right about everything that exists inside of the company. But I do think it means you will approach certain problems with just a much different perspective. And in those moments, I think there are a lot of decisions where you will find people will say, hey, we are aligned, we're on the same page, we have the same incentives. But that may not be true. And so you might find yourself having to go to bat for customers and having to go to bat in the long run, and sort of be out on an island in those situations, or feel like you're out on the island on those situations. And I guess I would just share, like, don't give in those moments. Like, you're not alone. Like, I think over time, people, like, you'll build a reputation and a brand for like sticking up for customers and sticking up for what's right, in a way that is just very uncommon. And I think that, that's kind of probably the main advice I would give at this stage, is I do think that, like, as a founder, you can play for the long haul in a way that nobody else is really incentivized to do so.
I don't have a question as my last thought here, but I do have a comment, which is sort of related. So I mentioned that we're customers of Zapier. I have been through two companies, my previous company, Trendkite and QuotaPath. And Zapier is actually a customer of ours. Wait, I don't know if I contractually can do that. So if I have to go back and look at the T's and edit this out, that's okay. But it's okay. This is the very CEO thing to do. So Zapier is a customer of ours, and you guys have been for a while. We're going through your renewal, and so we have Zaps set up all over Slack, of course, and one's on like renewal. And halfway through the year, our director of AI ops, Brandon, had to drop in like all the renewals because our Zap broke. Guess what the first renewal was? Zapier. It's the most ironic,
Really
ironic
bad
piece.
timing.
No, it was just hilarious. It was the first time of the year that it broke. Like when zaps break, it's a, I'm sure you hear about this all the time. It's like, it's just one of those things that sometimes are uncontrollable around it. Not a big deal in the quota path world and easily fixable, of course. So thought that was a fun story. But I'll look at the T's and C's on a contract and see if I'm allowed to say Zapier's a customer.
Wade,
Real pick me up story there, AJ.
yeah, exactly. Way to end.
At the end of the day, we've been very, very happy customers, and I think like where we're headed in like making Brandon our director of AI ops was very much fundamental in some of the change management and changes that you all see in the world. So I think you're in very good footing for it, but the world's changing so fast, so we just all have to stay on top of our stuff.
100%.
Wade, thanks so much for being our guest on Topline. We really appreciate making time in your schedule. If folks want to learn more, what's your favorite way where do you want to direct listeners so they can dive in maybe to your story or become customers?
Well, I'd say sign up for Zapier and build a Zap, build an agent, and give it a try. If you're looking for ideas, we have tons of templates. You can go check out the blog. You can follow me on Wade Foster on X or LinkedIn, and I'm constantly sharing like other ways customers are getting the most out of this stuff. So I would say jump on in. The water's warm. You'll have a good time. This stuff is pretty incredible if you give it a chance.
Awesome. Wade, thanks so much. Thanks for listening to Topline, everybody.